We are recording this session, and all the summit sessions will be recorded for our internal purposes to be able to take away some really good inputs from all of you, and to take away what we need to set up this work for the next year, and also to share on the website. So a couple of housekeeping things. We have a Q&A box, and I hope that, at this point we are all very familiar with Zoom, but there are still glitches here and there. So at the bottom of your screen, there should be a Q&A box. And after I introduce our speaker for this morning, we're going to have a little chat. And if time permits, we'll have time for some questions. And when we do have those questions, please do use the Q&A box. One other thing, we do have a set of community guidelines. This is a virtual summit. We're sharing virtual space. And so the boundaries of acceptability and respect have to sort of be redefined and redrawn when we coexist and we do difficult work in a virtual space. So we put together some community guidelines. There's also a statement of values in there. Please do check those out on the website. We also have a full summit ahead. So I want to give a very short overview of what this virtual summit will hold. We are kicking off the summit today with Gara Sasa, who I'll introduce in a moment. And we are after this, we're moving into a session on climate finance with three incredible speakers. And they're going to be giving an overview of what is climate finance and what are the structural barriers to unlocking climate finance. After that, we're moving into a session on trade justice and tax justice, two very important sort of structural barriers to a global energy transition is our trade system and our tax system. And there are so many radical tax and trade instruments that we could be making use of. It won't be as granular. It'll be our speakers for that session are fantastic. They'll give a broad overview of the main issues within trade and tax. And the following day, we're going to open up with a session, a really fascinating session on financial architecture, financial institutions, and debt. These are two really massive barriers to climate action. Our financial architecture was born after the Second World War and is largely outdated, has faced widespread resistance around the world. And it's a system that is deeply flawed and upholds and perpetuates the climate crisis. And so we'll be sort of exploring that and exploring the cycle of debt that plagues the global South that is perpetuated by these institutions. So all of these topics, finance, tax, trade, financial architecture, and debt, all of these are sort of core pillars of global climate justice. This is not a comprehensive list by any means. We are missing some really big conversations in the summit ahead. And, we have a very colorful and beautiful climate movement that is holding different parts of the struggle. So this is our little piece of the conversation, and we will hopefully build on that for the years to come. This is just the beginning. We're going to be taking the outcomes from the summit and moving into a year of hopefully beautiful movement building ahead. I do want to mention, after each workshop, the workshops are 2 hours long on the website, but the first hour is just the panel. The second hour is a participatory workshop that's led by Shake Up the Establishment. And these workshops are really the place where folks can dive into these ideas. These ideas are so new to so many of us. We don't really have a strong politic around this in Canada. We don't have a strong public discourse around these topics. And so a lot of these ideas are new, they're untested. We haven't argued about them with each other. We haven't discussed them with our comrades and our allies. And those workshops are really a chance for us to do that. So they are a critical part of the conference. They're very participatory. We have Shake Up the Establishment has designed a really cool process for us to be able to input our ideas and our thoughts and our connections and to be able to arrive closer to a place where we understand the issues, we're able to identify Canada's role in these issues, Canada's specific role. And then beyond that, we're able to identify the specific policy levers that we can push on, that we can build power around to actually push these issues and to make change on them. So, like I said, the very start of a wonderful conversation. So I want to now turn to our speaker who has so kindly joined us, and I'm so excited to welcome Gara Sasa. So Gara is a PhD candidate at McMaster University, and she's completing her PhD in political science and international relations. She's researching Israeli green colonialism. And she uncovers Israel's appropriation of environmentalism to colonize Palestine, as well as Palestinian memories, to advocate for decolonization and the dismantlement of the human nature binary. Since 2014, she's been heavily engaged in Palestine solidarity organizing while advocating for the liberation of women, queer and Black folks, and other oppressed communities. So you can find, we're going to be posting some of Gada's publications on the website. And I'd love for everyone to give a very warm virtual welcome to Gara Sasa.
Thank you so much for that kind welcome, Anjali. And, thank you for, including me here. I know Palestinian voices are often suppressed, and I'm just really excited to take part in this conference that's linking human and environmental rights. So I wish I could be there in person. And thank you for making it accessible with the virtual platform. So, yeah, I do my work on Israeli green colonialism, which means that I look at how Israel weaponizes environmental policies like protected areas and tree planting in order to colonize Palestine. And I guess maybe I'll start by just saying that obviously it's been heavy. Over the last year, Israel has been leading a genocide against my people in Palestine. It's killed over 100 members of my family in Gaza. And that's just, a drop in an ocean of blood. They've killed, they say at least 200,000 Palestinians. Personally, I estimate at least 500,000 have been killed so far from the bombardment, from the starving of people, you know, they're cutting off food, water, electricity, medication. They're targeting hospitals and schools. And so this has been recognized as a Holocaust against Palestinians. And we say this has been going on not just since October 7, 2023, but since 1948. And this is part of a settler colonial project. And so what's going on in Palestine is actually the same as what's going on in so-called Canada. And this is not something that just finished, right? Until now, Canada is taking Indigenous land, preventing, clean water from being accessible to Indigenous communities, failing to find, or support missing and murder Indigenous women. And yeah, so we see how, the foster system, how Indigenous people continue to be genocided here. And so it's the same thing that's been happening in Palestine. They've been taking more and more of our land and trying to erase or appropriate our culture and memories. So in my project, I look at how, for example, protected areas were actually invented by the United States, both nature reserves and national parks during the 19th century. But I say that Western environmentalism as an ideology and movement was founded in the 18th century, and it was basically framed around the human nature dichotomy. So the idea that basically humans and nature are separate and humans are actually inherently unsustainable. But it has a very racist lens, of course. So basically, women, people of color, and the poor were labeled as unsustainable. And so they were kicked out. Most protected areas in the world were created through ethnic cleansing. And then they became marketed as places of leisure, primarily for white rich men. And so, Yeah, there's a lot of violence in Western environmentalism, and a lot of these organizations, like the World Wildlife Fund. I mean, we can look at what they've been doing in Asia and Africa, in the name of environmentalism, actually enabling just the murder and rape of Indigenous people. And I feel like we don't talk about this because I did my BA in environmental studies and international studies, and I didn't know till my own research in my master's that a lot of these protected areas that we deem are progressive actually have very violent histories. And it's only very recently that we've come to understand and reckon with this. So I know in so-called Canada, they've started to build tribal parks that recognize Indigenous rights. We're seeing the same in Australia, and sure enough, they realize that, okay, when we protect human rights, the environment is also benefiting, right? Because for millennia, indigenous societies all over the world knew that we could sustainably coexist with the environment. The problem is not indigenous people. And so I'm gonna kind of answer be like to the other question because I feel like it just relates. How do we tackle climate change through an internationalism that is critical? We have to look at the roots of climate change, which I argue are the same roots as any other issue, right? Like poverty, ethnic cleansing. The three major structures driving these forms of violence are white supremacy, patriarchy, and capitalism. These are the structures that we need to eradicate, and it's all interlinked. So a win for Palestine is a win for Indigenous people here. A win against anti-Blackness here is a win for everywhere else. And it's just sad the way that people have been divided. And we're living at a very critical moment, as I'm sure everybody here knows. Scientists say we don't have much time to act to combat climate change, but we can't do it if we're not looking at the issue holistically. So if I guess I can talk a little bit about Israeli green colonialism and let me know if I'm taking too long. Um, Israeli green colonialism, I look at how basically Israel created its national parks and nature reserves and concentrated them in areas where most Palestinians who survived the 1948 Nakba still live, and in areas that it deems strategic. So really Jerusalem, the occupied West Bank and the Syrian Golan Heights, and the north of historic Palestine. Whereas if you look at the central and Tel Aviv districts, which are almost, uh, only occupied by Jewish Israelis, these areas are almost void of protected areas. And so I argue that Israel, what it's doing is using protected areas to basically argue Palestinians aren't welcome in that space. And at the same time, it's allowing Jewish settlers to uh, cultivate, build, and even recently has been passing laws. So it's like institutional eco-apartheid. And, part of it has been planting trees. And so, the Jewish National Fund actually was founded in 1901, and it portrays itself as the biggest environmental organization in the Middle East, and that it grew 220 million trees since its establishment. But this organization was primarily created to colonize Palestinian land. In the 1970s, the UN actually recognized it as a racist institution. And only a couple of months ago, Canada has finally revoked the charitable status of the JNF. And I know the JNF now is taking Canada to court over this, but that's because it's been proven that it's funding the Israeli military, which is contravening Canada's charitable laws. So this is just an example of the greenwashing that's going on. And 90% of the forests that Israel has grown are not indigenous to the land. And so what they're doing is they've been uprooting hundreds of thousands of our olive trees and indigenous fruits and cacti in order to de-Arabize the land. And then at the same time, there's planting these European pines in order, to Europeanize it. Because again, this is part of a white supremacist project. And so, as you can imagine, these trees, as part of this colonial project, have harmed the indigenous people, but also the plants. The pines have poisonous needles that have been acidifying the land, making it like animals can't feed on it. They've also created monocultures. So Israeli scientists have referred to these areas as pine deserts. And as we've seen in the last couple of years, particularly in Jerusalem, with climate change, what's been happening is that these Israeli trees have been going up in flames. they're just like they've made the country a tinderbox. And you can see pictures where the olive trees are fine and then the Israeli pines are on fire. And so what I argue is that the land itself is resisting decades into the occupation. And yeah, it's just like it's obviously a huge issue. And another thing I wanted to mention is this idea that Israel's making the desert bloom. And a lot of Canadian environmental literature tries to hype up Israel as a startup nation, as a progressive state, but it's actually extremely racist and orientalist. This idea that, oh, like the Middle East is just this desert that people don't take care of, they don't live in, and that they, with their cultural superiority, were able to redeem it. And what's ironic is Palestine was known as the cradle of agriculture, like the olive tree is one of the oldest cultivated fruits. And they've Israel, with its planting of pines, has actually desertified the land. It's proven to have contributed to a local climate warming effect in the Naqab. So basically, the southern half of Palestine is technically a desert, although the northern half of that was known as the Palestine's breadbasket, which is Beersheba or Bir Sabah. And the northern half of Palestine was a Mediterranean climate, and Palestinians grew everything there. But yeah, they've been desertifying it with their pine trees because they're sucking up all the available water with these, foreign trees.
Mhm.
So, one of my papers that hopefully will come out next month, I'm excited for, is actually looking at it's a case study. So I look at one particular park that Israel has built over several Palestinian villages. And my project is not only to show Israeli green colonial violence, how it erases the history of these villages when you go there, through obviously the planting of trees over the ruins of Palestinian villages, through its posters on its brochures, just not mentioning the villages, or if it does mention them, it's just kind of like, oh, this is a ruin.
Mhm.
As if people didn't live there. So yeah, not only to show that erasure, that memoricide, but on the other hand, my paper uncovers the history of these villages. So I look at a lot of interviews with Nakba survivors in order to keep their memories alive, like how, beautiful their cultures were, how they, what they grew, the Arabic names of the central landmarks. And in my opinion, I'm not just restoring their memory, but I'm actually, building the blueprint for the return of Palestinians. As bleak as things are right now, I am so proud of my people and I'm so optimistic that we are going to be free by 2030. I've been saying this for years now. The boycott movement has making huge strides. People everywhere are talking about Palestine. And I just feel like, yeah, it's gonna get worse. It's gonna get worse. I'm following right now what's happening in my village. If you follow me on Twitter, you can see in the last couple of days, just
Mhm.
today, they've been detaining school children in our village. And yesterday, they were like, just like wrecking havoc at our stores. They're on our rooftops. They're targeting our mosques. It's very bad, but it's going to spread this violence in the West Bank and even within what's called Israel. But also, we're seeing Palestinian resistance in all kinds of ways. And I think with the external pressure right now, yeah, Israel will be dismantled in the next couple of years, just like we've seen with apartheid South Africa. And with the dismantling of Israel, hopefully we'll see also here, we can see land back. We can see the actual recognition of indigenous sovereignty. And yeah, so I think it's going to be a cascade, hopefully
Mhm.
a progressive one in the region and worldwide. Um, yeah, we have no choice but to resist. So
Yeah.
I guess I'll keep it there for now. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Gada. That was just, you made so many connections just in that 10 minutes. You know, we there's so many pieces I want to touch on. First of all, your sense of hope and like hopeful just absolute belief that the Palestinian people will rise is so beautiful. And it's, as you said, a win for Palestine is the win for indigenous peoples here. And as you were talking about the sort of the idea of making the desert bloom and the idea of land that has not been sort of uh, colonized is seen as this like wild, untamed, uh, uh, feral land. And that story has repeated itself so much in North America with the creation, I mean, even the United States, the creation of the major national parks, Yellowstone, in national parks in Canada as well. The idea that the landscape is wild and untouched before Europeans shape it. But actually now, even just recent research, I'm sure you're covering this in your PhD, has shown that the landscapes that we consider to be raw and untouched are actually carefully cultivated over thousands of years through this just like deep scientific knowledge and understanding of the land. So because this is a short session, we do have to wrap up. Thank you for sharing your brilliance. I have one follow-up question for you, and hopefully to set the tone for the rest of our conference. You know, you've made this connection between about how deeply environmentalism, and by extension, our climate movement in so many ways, it rests upon the foundation of colonization and of this like colonial military machine. And so there's a lot of climate folks who are attending this conference. It's a conference about climate justice. So in your words, like how will having a critical internationalism, how do you think that will help change the climate movement? That's a bit of a big question.
Thank you. Yeah, no, I think like hope is revolutionary. And so we need to hang on to it. But at the same time, it's not like a passive optimism. We need to be proactive about it. So I will say that we can all do our part and use our privileges and our skills to combat climate change. And so, like I said, our climate change needs to be overtly anti-oppressive. And it's just, disappointing that actually when I started my research 5 years ago, I noticed that most environmental groups didn't even talk about human rights. Like only the last couple of years, we're seeing talk about anti-Blackness and anti-Asian racism. And so, and now with Palestine, really, I've seen only Greenpeace somewhat just call for a ceasefire, but it's been very weak. Like the Palestine exception is real in leftist spaces. And so, yeah, this is why I argue, how do we tackle climate change? Of course, it needs to be international because, this earth is round. You can't just, this is why protected areas also haven't been affected. Like 15% of the world right now are protected areas. And what are they doing for climate change? Nothing. I actually argue they're fueling it because, they're just displacing the blame onto indigenous people as if like, if we fence this protected area, it's protected from carbon dioxide. Like that's not how it works. Like what a lot of climate scientists are doing is like individualizing it, like putting it on us to recycle. But
Right.
actually, what we need to do is see it from a structural perspective. If we actually protect human rights, I really do feel that the earth itself will be able to heal. I mean, we're seeing the ozone layer right now
Mhm.
heal up, right? We're seeing the olive trees come back in Palestine. So I take a lot of hope in that. And yeah, so yeah.
That's so, so beautiful. Thank you so much for sharing those connections with us, such critical connections. And we're so grateful that you came and helped us kick off the virtual part of the conference in a good way.
Thank you
Um,
so much.
Thank
There's
you
no
for
way
being
we
here.
can take any questions.
Oh, well, we have, we do have like 2 minutes, and if folks feel free to drop off as you need to. But if we do have any questions, um, I think we're gonna need to have them sent to me by my team folks. Do you have any questions in the chat? Okay, I am seeing more comments in the chat. There's a lot of solidarity for you in the
I
chat.
know. Thank you guys for the kind
Yeah,
comments.
yeah.
Yeah, and
It's a super short session, but if you're able to join for the rest of the conference, I think that it would be really interesting to engage with these ideas in relation to some of these other pieces that we're talking about. Like green colonialism is so linked to cycles of debt as well. You were talking about the individualization of the problem, and last year, The Guardian uncovered an investigation that over 90% of carbon offsets are actually junk offsets. They don't actually reduce emissions in any way. And those are very colonial as well. There's so many carbon offset projects that are plant a tree somewhere else in the world. And those tree planting projects are based on land grabs from indigenous peoples and from local communities. And so we really reinterrogating the whole core of why we do this work.
yeah, no, that's great. And it's so disturbing, like just like you said, yeah, this idea like, oh, these national parks, like they were untouched, right? Like they just
Right.
erased. indigenous history. And what's funny is like, oh, we shouldn't interfere with nature. And so what
Right.
they've done is like they like even this concept of invasive species is extremely shady because around the world, like what makes it invasive? Is it here like 200 years ago, 500 years ago? And like species move, species evolve. That's not to say like pick up any species, put it anywhere, and like, what Israel does literally like insist on planting it even when it dies, even when it causes destruction. But we can carry pollen in our hair. Like we're mammals too. We can move species around. But yeah, like there's so much to discuss, but I think it's interesting to see a lot of protected areas now. They actually are like slashing a lot of their trees or using fires. Like they're using a lot of the indigenous tactics to see actually like our interaction with nature can be helpful. And so yeah, we're learning a lot of that. And obviously indigenous people are also like, learning a lot from science. Like it's I want to be careful not to like also perpetuate the noble savage trope when it comes to indigenous people. But yeah, obviously, as people who've been living off our land, it's like we need to see, I always say we have to see our interconnectedness. It's not just like an altruistic, like we help nature. It's like, the land feeds us and, just treating it with respect and understanding the sacredness of it. So,
Mm.
yeah, anyways, thank you. And I'm going to try to join
Beautiful.
the other sessions. I'll do my best.
Thank you for finishing on that note. There is so much beauty and so much wisdom and deep science and deep knowledge that still exists, that will live on, and that will heal our world. So thank you so much, Gada, for being here. Thank you, everyone, for helping us to kick off the conference. Our next session starts in 30 minutes. Hope to
Thank
see
you.
you there. Bye, Gada. Thanks for being
Bye.
here. Bye.